The start of 2023 has been gloom and doom, especially for the global tech sector. In just the first few days of January, about 25,000 job cuts have been announced. Let's start with Amazon. That clarified that in all, they would be cutting 18,000 jobs. 10,000 were already cut in November last year, and another 8,000 are going to go. Salesforce is also another company that has announced big cuts today. The company plans to cut 10% of its workforce, which could be a massive cut as well. A media company, Vimeo, has also announced job cuts. Now, the question among all of this is, what does it mean for the global tech scenario? What does it mean for India? To speak more on this, I'm joined today by Jang Bahadur Singh, Director Human Capital Solutions Aon India, Sashi Kumar, MD Indeed, Rehan Yarkhan, Managing Partner, Orias Venture Partners, and Vijay Sivaram, CEO, Quest IT Staffing. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us on the India Development Debate. Jang Bahadur Singh, great to have you on the show. Tell me what you think of this. Is this just the beginning? And especially, let's start with Amazon that had already announced its cuts last year. Now they have increased 10,000 to 18,000 essentially, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Tamanna. Firstly, I think a very, very good evening to all your viewers. I think the way you position it, it does paint a very, very bleak picture. But I think the view that we hold internally is one of concern and keen interest, and I'll tell you why. I think when you look at an Amazon, when you look at a Meta, the business models that they have are very fundamentally different to what we see here in India. In India today, there are almost 3 to 4 million people which are part of the tech sector. But the jobs that we have in India are more aligned to the IT services segment. And if we translate the global layoffs into India, it's less than 100,000 and majorly concentrated in the early stage segment. The second piece is, I think, a lot of the job cuts that we are seeing in the tech segment are coming as a result of margin pressures, are coming as firms struggle to meet their analyst expectations. And in any such scenario where you're trying to preserve costs, you always look for geographies, you look for opportunities wherein you can improve your margins, and which is where India as a geography has a large population of captive, has a large talent pool which works in the captive
Mr.
segment.
Singh, let me come in a bit to the India impact, because today the story is not really India. We understand that, and because of our interests, we will talk about it eventually. But I think we need to spend some time first talking about what really is happening in global tech. Why these massive job cuts? Why an addition of job cuts as far as Amazon is concerned, one of the most valuable companies in the world?
Yeah. So if you look at Amazon, I think Amazon is, as a group, they're into multiple businesses. Amazon has a very, very large e-commerce business. Amazon has a very large AWS business. And majority of the layoffs that have been announced our sense is that they're coming from their e-commerce segment, which has underperformed as the consumer spending across the globe is coming down. I think most analysts either say that the recession is already here or it's going to be there, as we move further into the Q1 segment, as we move further into Q1. And which is where I think across the board firms, IT product firms are feeling the pinch. And similarly, I think if you look at Meta, if you look at any of the other firms, we have to look at them as a multitude, as a firm which has multiple businesses, and there are business lines which are not doing well. There are businesses which are probably very, very exploratory in nature, which are not doing well, and majority of the layoffs are coming from there. I think the pain in this segment is probably going to be there for the next couple of sectors, but I think long term, we are still confident that this is the tech age. It's almost like in the industrial age, steam engine is the driver. Similarly, in the tech age, these technology firms will be the drivers. So long term, we do expect the sector to recover. But yes, in the short term, probably in the next 2 quarters, there will be some pain that we do see.
Why the job cuts? Why the need for job cuts? Let me come to Vijay Sivaram on this question. Part of it seems to be the fact that they hired very, very aggressively post-pandemic. And there's too much of bench strength. The anticipation of growth has not come in. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. I think, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of it. I think there are a couple of things that happen, and one is bang on, like you rightly said. Over the last year, when the surge happened in hiring across the globe, a lot of organizations increased their spending towards attracting employees and brought in employees at a much higher cost than what they assumed to be real, which was obviously not required when the gross margin started taking a little bit of pressure. Second, a lot of very new large-scale projects were also incubated in view of the focus that they have to build more product lines and more digital streams. A lot of new and large incubation projects started for which they hired people, and many of them have not been able to take off as well. And so quite a percentage of layoffs that you see are for those projects which have been started recently, which really are not taking off. And third, like mentioned earlier, the people are getting back to stores, people are getting back to malls, people are shopping and going back, and they're not ordering online much. So a lot of the online ecosystem, the e-commerce ecosystems, and including a lot of startup ecosystems, are seeing that brunt in terms of the demand, which is further hitting their gross margins and then EBITDA. And therefore, there's some pressure to reduce some tech costs there as well. And last but not the least, I think those companies where they are heavily funded and there have been a lot of tough questions asked by boards as well as equity investors, I think there's some pressure to also show some cost benefit back to them. Maybe not in the format of Amazon, but in the format of some of the other companies that are seeing some pressures at the bottom line to make sure that their IDC stays, their indirect cost stays stable, and focus on the gross margin as well as the revenue line stays clear.
Rehan Yar Khan, the big reasoning, and I'm not going to say it's an excuse, but the big reasoning is that we might hit a global recession. Our largest markets will hit a recession. Is that becoming an opportunity for these companies to review businesses which are no longer making sense, to cut back on costs which they don't necessarily need, and maybe let go of employees that weren't the right decision in the first place?
Yeah, I'm reminded of a similar announcement by IBM in 2008, 2009, 2010, that period when Sam Palesmino was running IBM. They were, what they were doing is that they were actually shifting staff from the West to India, right? And they were letting go a lot of people over there and they were hiring in India. So I'm wondering if this is something similar, right? Because what happens in a recession is that you're trying to optimize costs. And as we all know, employees in the West in their home markets are far more expensive than people in India. So I think a part of it could be that, right? Is that a lot of these, because I read that announcement by Andy Jassy of that 18,000 people they're letting go of. But I suspect a lot of those jobs will shift to India. What they're doing is they're cutting costs and they're rationalizing.
And they're shutting some of their businesses in India. They have been doing since the end of last year. So it's not as if they're on a hiring spree in India either.
No, but you have to remember the India operation has two aspects to it. One is the India business and one is their global back office, right? Maybe, in the India business, listen, and this is with every business, it's not just with Amazon, or it's not necessarily in this phase. Everybody, sets up new experimental businesses and then pulls back on them because you know how it is, right? 2 in 10 experiments works. So that is possibly a normal thing. This being a global announcement, I'm wondering if some of these jobs are shifting to the India back office. That's something we'll have to see because they haven't announced that along with it, and they won't announce that along with it, right? Because then there'll be an uproar in their home market. But that is something I saw in the last sort of major financial crisis, that a lot of that shifted to India.
Shashi Kumar, you have any view on that theory of Rehan Yar Khan? Or is this a more broad, global sort of trend we're seeing in company after company? There have been quite a few. We're talking only about the news today, but this has been an ongoing story, isn't it?
Yes. Good evening, Tamanna. Good evening, everybody on the panel and your viewers, and a very happy new year. Yes, we've been seeing this news for some time, but I cannot speculate or I have no insight into what the reasons are for individual companies. But let's look at what's happened over the last couple of years. We've seen an unprecedented scale of digitalization because people were mostly forced to be at home. And that meant a lot of things that happened offline were happening online. Two, we saw a lot of government money going into the hands of people in many Western countries, which meant that spending increased significantly. So that was the second trend. Today, we are seeing a reopening across the world. So some of the digital spends have now moved back offline. Those checks aren't coming anymore. And three, we are seeing a war in Ukraine and a significant increase in inflation at levels in the developed market. So this I think the answer to what's happening across the world, across companies, lies somewhere between these three factors. However, I wouldn't. I mean, obviously, bad news sells, and that's why it's dominating the headlines. I would still think that, given a couple of quarters, we should see some semblance return with specific, instances of jobs moving to different places, including India. I think it's really company by company. I don't think there's a broad strategy across of moving in one direction or the other.
You heard that little jibe at us, bad news sells, but news is news. When there are expansion sprees and economy is booming, we talk about it as well. 25,000 job cuts announced in the first 4 days of January. Are you saying we should play that down? I mean, it's happening.
No, we should. No, absolutely not. It's just that, but that is at one level. But if you were to look at, I mean, sitting in India, speaking specifically for India, if you were to look at what our data tells, we should also focus on that. For example, in this month, in the previous month, in December, we saw that the number of open roles in India, specifically on Indeed, was 80% higher than what it was in pre-pandemic levels. Obviously, there is job creation and job hiring that's happening.
That's very interesting you say that. It's very interesting you say that, because I had a conversation earlier this week with team leads actually on this show, and we talked specifically about open positions in IT in India in December 2022. And the story was exactly opposite to what you're saying. They said they saw a massive drop in open positions in December 2022 compared to a year ago. They're not comparing it to pre-pandemic. So what is the India story then?
So I'm comparing it to pre-pandemic because a lot of the data that you see coming out post-pandemic is skewed. In the first half of the pandemic, we saw a significant drop. And then towards 2021 and early 2022, we saw a significant increase driven by causes of the pandemic. So for us to be sort of equanimous to sort of take away the effect of both of this, we compare data to pre-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, definitely there's been an 80% increase. Yes, there's been a drop in comparison to 2021, but that's only to be expected. We saw a significant hiring rush in 2021. In fact, we did a survey where we spoke to over 1,200 enterprise companies in India, and about 46% of them came back and said that they intend to hire or increase the workforce by 20% in the course of 2023. But concerns remain. I mean, I'm not saying that concerns don't remain. They said the top concerns that they have.
Okay, so let's talk about the India story. Let's talk about the India story, because a lot of these companies that we're talking about are American companies, and their major geographies are facing a recession fear. That's now very, very clear. There's no question mark over there. The US, Europe, China, large global market is facing a recession fear. What's happening in India? Vijay Sivaram, there seems to be sort of this narrative that India is marching to its own tune, and that's possibly very true. Can that be said of the IT space though, which is at the end of the day an export-oriented sector? It depends on how the world moves.
So let me break that out for you. And I think everyone said a very key point. I'm trying to just summarize 2-3 things here. One, we should be very, very careful when we start comparing our hiring demands with the surge that happened last year. We have to take what is pre-pandemic, what is post-pandemic during the surge, and then we have to arrive at a number whether it has gone down or gone up. So we have to be very careful when we look at the comparison points over here. Number two, I completely agree with Rehan on the fact that a decision taken to lay off may not necessarily always be to reduce headcount, but it could be a decision taken to reduce high-cost location headcount and bring it down to. So we see in specific pockets within the Quest business where we see global captive centers actually ramping up more than what they did the last 2-3 years on an average, per month. So we are seeing global captive houses again, and my assumption on that front is that somewhere, possibly the jobs have come down and they're getting replaced here, because obviously there's a cost advantage, and also there is a value add, that's the talent availability that's around here. Third, we are seeing a significant uptick in the Indian consumer businesses, whether you're seeing things like retail, consumer products, and other areas where we do continue to see a decent hiring demand coming through. Maybe e-commerce, I think there's a little bit of a slump in terms of hiring, a little bit of slowness, but all the other consumer-led businesses, like I mentioned, when you walk into a mall today, when you walk into a movie theater today, you see people going back out, and that means they are purchasing and spending, and which is where the India story comes in, is that India is weathering a large amount of the storm through the consumer behavior that's happening on the ground today. Now, we don't know if COVID is going to hit us again. We don't know how the recession fears are going to lay down. There could be a deep trough that happens right now, and then there could be a deep spike later happen. I think that's a more wait and watch story that's going to happen.
Okay, so wait and watch story, not exuberant or despondent either way. Let's keep it balanced. Mr. Singh, you were talking earlier about the India story, and I repeat that question to you. I put that question forward to you as well. Can we really say that the India story is divorced from what's happening globally, especially in the tech space?
So I think obviously the Indian tech firms are also part of the larger ecosystem.
Exactly.
And if you look at the commentary that has been coming out, most of them have said that margin pressures are there, and at least for the next 2 quarters, even growth would be subdued. Having said that, I think we do not see the same amount of layoffs happening in India simply because before you come to a situation where you're thinking about laying off people, downsizing, there are a bunch of steps that you would take. At this point, we've heard about firms slashing bonuses, and then probably they'll get into hiring freezes and so on and so forth. So they'll follow the entire path. So of the 3-4 million headcount that we have deployed in IT and BPO sector today, we don't expect layoffs to be happening, en masse in this segment. The other important piece today is, and I think some of my friends hinted about, is that we need to separate out the tech sector from the tech talent. Because while the tech sector is globally linked and, it will face pressure, it will face the same concerns to a large degree because their customers are sitting in North America, Europe, and so on and so forth. But when you look at tech talent, the large number of local companies in the financial services space, in, say, health and pharma, which are looking for this talent. And, mind you, this is the cream of the talent that sits in Amazon, Microsoft, and, some of their ilk. And there are many opportunities for them that exist outside of the tech sector as well, which is where, while we might see a migration of talent, maybe in the short term to some other sectors, but the demand for tech talent we don't see coming down because all of the businesses still need to do their digital journeys, they still need to build their digital capabilities and so on and so forth. So in that sense, from an overall India perspective, one, we do see some jobs coming in, and even in the last dot-com bubble burst or the subprime crisis immediately after that, or even as recent as the pandemic, we did see a lot of GCCs getting set up and firms, financial services moving front office to middle office and back office. So one softening of the blow will come from the expansion in the GCC space, and the other piece is that financial services more aligned to the local market, healthcare, pharma. All of these folks are also hungry for this talent, and which is where folks will find opportunities. And we do not see, in that sense, we do not see unemployment, for example, coming into this space or demand really coming down.
So the question is definitely on whether the impact will be massive for Indian IT companies seems unlikely. But let's also be very clear that these global companies that have announced layoffs also hire a lot of Indians. So there is going to be that extent of impact. Rehan, would it be fair to say that the impact would be in the offices of these companies here, or Indian nationals who are working for these companies on an H-1B visa, etc.? They are going to be the ones stuck in the short term?
Yeah, I think people who are working in those developed markets will feel pressure, whether they're Indians, Chinese, whoever, XYZ. Because that is secular, right? I think from a India perspective, listen, we are a low cost operating base, and that is our big USP around the world. I think we do benefit from global recessions with outsourcing and things moving east from the west. We've seen it happen in China in the past, where supply chains move more to the east. So when there's pressure on costs, people move to lower cost centers. They don't necessarily want to reduce volumes, because that affects a lot of other things, right? So that's happening on one side, and on the other side, the Indian economy is growing, right? I mean, we are seeing GDP numbers. Of course, they always come in a little bit below the projected numbers, but there is consistent growth every year. I was just looking at a report today. The number of taxpayers have gone up significantly in India in the last, almost 10 years. and so on and so forth, right? There's more infrastructure, there's more education, there's more consumption. So India is a growing country. See, we are known as a developing country because we are developing, right? America is a developed country, so they sort of have less growth. There's more sort of their growth comes from shift, right? You shift from one sector to the other sector, whereas our growth comes from development. So we are in a very different position from what they are. So while you are not completely immune to global pressures, see, interest rates hike are secular, right? Everybody's going through interest rate hikes. That's increasing cost of working capital, it's increasing cost of term loans, it's increasing cost of housing loans, and so on and so forth, right? Car loans. It's affecting people. So you're not divorced from that, but because we are a developing country, we have that cushion.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, where it's like I said, it's an export-oriented sector. The whole IT space is an export-oriented sector. So what's happening in, the global economy will impact to some extent. Sashi, I want to just come back to the primary sort of push for our conversation today. What's happening in Amazon, Salesforce. Are you expecting more of the same? Because we saw a big round of cuts in the end of 2022 and perhaps a spillover of that in the beginning of 2023. Are you expecting that to deepen or ease off, say, after the first 6 months of this year?
I'm hoping it will ease off, but we are living in uncertain times, Tamanna. We don't know what turn the war will take. We don't know what turn inflation, etc., and the economy will take. If there is significant easing of the war, we can expect a quick turnaround. If it continues, there will be continued pressure on fuel prices, etc., which will continue to push recessionary effects. So it depends. But I don't see this as a long-term effect. I do see that companies in India and across the world will continue to push towards digitization, increase tech adoption. Sooner rather than later, this sector will bounce back, and all of us should hope that it's sooner rather than later.
That hope is definitely there. We're also hoping that, India is completely secure, or at least secure to some extent, from these global headwinds that are blowing. It's looking like a tough year. Hopefully we will fare better. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today on the show.